Welcome to the Practical NLP podcast with me, Andy Smith. Catch up on previous episodes at nlppod.com. Let's look at some ideas from NLP for dealing with difficult people and the 5 Satir categories of behaviour under pressure. First, it's worth remembering that when you describe a person as difficult, what you're really saying is that you are finding it difficult to deal with that person at a particular time in a particular context. With somebody else, they may be fine. With you, in a different context, they may be fine. Even in the same context, there may be other factors present at that particular time which mean that you're finding them difficult at that moment. At other times, in that context, you may find them okay to deal with. So being difficult is not an intrinsic quality of that person. And if someone asked the other person, who's the difficult one in this relationship, they would probably say it was you. It's also worth remembering that people are not their behaviour. At certain times, in certain contexts, they behave in a way that you find difficult. But it's just some behaviour that they're doing. It's not their identity and the whole of who they are. Most of the time, when people are behaving in a way that you find hard to handle, it's because they're not in a resourceful state themselves. The renowned family therapist Virginia Satir, who you'll remember was one of the 3 therapists that Richard Bandler and John Grinder modelled at the start of NLP, noticed that people tend to fall into 4 recognisable ways of communicating and body posture when they're under stress. For example, in arguments or disputes. Some people will find some or all of these 4 patterns of behaviour not easy to deal with. One reason that it's useful for us to have a classification of these 4 behaviour patterns readily to hand is that being able to recognise a particular behaviour pattern as one of the Satir categories gives us a bit of distance from the behaviour. Oh, it's that. So we don't experience it as quite so in your face, and we can stay in a more resourceful state so we can deal with it better. Also, being able to recognise someone's behaviour as conforming to one of the Satir categories means we can prepare ways of dealing with it beforehand. So we're not always having to react automatically or trying to make up a response on the spot. These are the 4 patterns of behaviour under stress that Virginia Satir identified. Each one has its own distinctive body posture and type of language used. First one is called the placator. Their automatic response is to believe that everything is his or her fault. The placator is always trying to please others and always apologising. Their default way of dealing with confrontation is to cave in as soon as they're challenged. Their defining posture would be symmetrical, open physiology, looking up at you, arms outstretched, palms upwards and moving up. Type of language they use a lot of qualifiers. Only, even, just, a little. Could, would, I don't know. Second one is the blamer. The blamer pattern is loud, tyrannical, finger pointing. It's always someone else's fault. They have a harsh, shouting type voice. They probably feel lonely inside. Their default strategy in confrontations is to attack. Their defining posture would be in your face, leaning forward, pointing the finger at you. Type of language they'd use, a lot of universals, all, every, never. Lots of negative questions. Why can't you ever listen? Cause and effect violations. You're always making me angry. The next pattern is called the computer. Now, this person is dry, cool, super reasonable, takes a detached view of everything. They stand rigidly, as if cut off from everything below the neck, as if the body is just a means to convey the brain from place to place. They often stand back with their arms folded or one hand raised to their chin. They can rationalize anything, retreating into abstractions to escape their feelings. Intellect is important to the computer. Feelings are not to be trusted. They will avoid confrontations or any situation where emotions run high, if at all possible, and they'll try to hide behind logic, facts, and the rule book. So their defining posture would be quite rigid and leaning backwards to sort of detach themselves from the situation. The kind of language they use, lots of abstract words, long Latinate words, passive voice, nominalizations. So there was an agreement rather than we agreed. Another pattern is called the distractor. These people are always changing the subject, never answering a question directly. The distractor tends to feel ignored and will interrupt constantly to be noticed. They often have a repertoire of accents and funny voices. anything to avoid being serious or grown up. Their way of dealing with confrontation is to use humour as a pattern interrupt. Their defining posture is fluid, angular, always moving, lopsided, moving around a lot. The type of identifying language they use could be anything as long as it's not relevant. I don't know. It's not my fault. They can cycle through elements of the other 4 categories as well, in a kind of parody way. And a 5th category was added later when Virginia Satir observed that some people didn't go into an unresourceful state when under stress. And this pattern is called the leveler. It's congruent, calm, solid, confident, and authoritative. In confrontations, people using the leveler pattern stand their ground and behave in an assertive but not aggressive way. Their defining posture is symmetrical, upright, centered, hands moving downwards, palms down and spreading out. And they'll say things like, "This is the way it is. This is true." Remember, these are not personality types. These are behavior patterns that people tend to go into when they're under stress. And people may use one or more of them. So which of the Satir categories do you tend to behave like when you're under stress? Which of them would you feel really uncomfortable behaving like? And which category do you want to use more of in the future? Now, what if you could actually learn from difficult people? What if they have something to teach us if you're ready to learn? The NLP presupposition you want to keep in mind here is, behind every behavior is a positive intention. It's fairly easy to accept that every person, no matter what they do or how obnoxious their behavior seems, is acting from a positive intention towards themselves. This belief helps to understand them and to let go of any anger or resentment we may feel towards them, as does imagining ourselves in their shoes. But what would life be like if you believed that your aggressive patient or nagging spouse or a motorist who cuts you up actually had a positive intention, not just for themselves, but towards you? Beliefs don't have to be true. They just have to be useful. Having said that, they may stop being useful if they consistently contradict your experience or are so incompatible with shared reality that they interfere with your rapport with people around you. What would life be like if you believed that the positive intention of the inconsiderate motorist was to help you to learn to be a calmer driver? Would you be more likely to feel better and be more in control of the situation if you had that belief? What if your whole life was a virtual reality interactive training package, so that everything that happened to you was designed to teach you something? If you don't learn what you need to learn from a challenge the first time, life will go on presenting you with that challenge in different forms until you do learn what needs to be learned and can move on to the next learning. Would that be a useful belief to help you learn from experience? Use this process next time you encounter a person you find difficult. First, ask yourself, what is the positive intention behind their behavior? Put yourself in their shoes and see things from their point of view. Probably best not to do this with seriously disturbed people. See yourself briefly through their eyes. What do you learn from this different viewpoint? Now ask yourself, if that person's behavior had a positive intention towards you behind it, what would that positive intention be? What positive lessons do you need to learn from your interaction with that person? We often project qualities or characteristics we dislike onto another person. As you're responding to your internal representation of the person, rather than the person themselves, guess where the annoying characteristic really is? Within you. So it can be useful, if sometimes uncomfortable, to add a 4th step to the process. So finally ask yourself, how am I like that person? When do I behave like that? That's it for this week's podcast. Remember, you can see the show notes for this episode at nlppod.com, and you can download back episodes you may have missed from the online store at webstore.nlppod.com. See you next time.